All right, welcome to the family. I am Brother Afrodescendant coming back with another reading. Peace and blessings to you all on this late night reading of Frantz Fanon, Black Skin, White Mass. Please like, share, subscribe. For those who are on live, check in on the chat. Give me your check-in, where you're coming from, where you're calling from. If you enjoy this reading, let me know if you have any reading recommendations. The last reading I did was The Way of the Orisha, which was very enlightening for myself and for others. And let me know if there's anything that you'd like to see today. We're going in a little philosophical, sociological, political slant with Frantz Fanon's excellent work, historical work, Black Skin, White Mass. Again, support this channel, check in on the chat, and we will get right to it. We'll just skip past the foreword and the introduction, and we will go right into chapter 1, as we have done previously. The Black Man and Language. We attach a fundamental importance to the phenomenon of language, and consequently consider the study of language essential for providing us with one element in understanding the black man's dimension of being for others, it being understood that to speak is to exist absolutely for the other. The black man possesses two dimensions, one with his fellow blacks, the other with the whites. A black man behaves differently with a white man than he does with another black man. There is no doubt whatsoever that this vociferousness is a direct consequence of the colonial undertaking. Nobody dreams of challenging the fact that its principal inspiration is nurtured by the core of theories which represent the black man as the missing link in the slow evolution from ape to man. These are objective facts that state reality. But once we have taken note of the situation, once we have understood it, we consider the job done. How can we possibly not hear that voice again tumbling down the steps of history? It's no longer a question of knowing the world, but of transforming it. This question is terribly present in our lives. To speak means being able to use certain syntax and possessing the morphology of such and such a language. But it means, above all, assuming culture and bearing the weight of civilization. Since the situation is not one-sided, the study should reflect this. We would very much like to be given credit for certain points that, however unacceptable they may appear early on, will prove to be factually accurate. The problem we shall tackle in this chapter is as follows. The more the Black Antillean assimilates the French language, the whiter he gets, i.e., the closer he comes to becoming a true human being. So this is in context being that Frantz Fanon is a Black Caribbean from an island that was subjugated by the French. This is applicable to those who were subjugated by the British and subsequently Black Americans in America. And this deals with one of culture. So throughout the book, Fanon goes through this in a context of being a subject of France and black people's relationship to that, but it also applies throughout the world, regardless to what their position is as a colonial subject. A man who possesses a language possesses an indirect consequence. the world expressed and implied by this language. You can see what we're driving at. There is an extraordinary power in the possession of a language. Paul Valéry knew this and described language as the God gone astray in flesh. In a work in progress, we propose to study this phenomenon. For the time being, we would like to demonstrate why the Black Antillean, whoever he is, always has to justify his stance in relation to the language. Going one step farther, we shall enlarge the scope of our description to include every colonized subject. All colonized people, in other words, people in whom an inferiority complex has taken root, whose local cultural originality has been committed to the grave, position themselves in relation to the civilizing language, i.e. the metropolitan culture. The more the colonized has assimilated the cultural values of the metropolis, the more he will have escaped the bush. The more he rejects his blackness and the bush, the whiter he will become. In the colonial army, and particularly in regiments of Senegalese soldiers, the native officers are mainly interpreters. They serve to convey to their fellow soldiers the master's orders, and they themselves enjoy a certain status. There is the town, there is the country, there is the capital, there are the provinces. Apparently, the problem is the same. Take an inhabitant of Lyon in Paris. He will boast of how calm his city is, how bewitchingly beautiful are the banks of the Rhone, how magnificent are the plane trees, and so many other things that people with nothing to do like to go on about. If you meet him on his return from Paris, and especially if you've never been to the capital, he'll never stop singing its praises. Paris, city of light, the Seine, the riverside dance cafes, see Paris and die. The same process repeats itself in the case of the Martinican. First, there is his island, Basse Pointe, Marigot, Gros-Mont, in opposition to the opposing city of Fort-de-France. Then, and this is the essential point, there is what lies beyond his island. The black man who has been to the Metropole is a demigod. On this subject, I shall indicate a fact that must have struck my fellow islanders. After fairly long stay in the Metropole, many Antillians return home to be deified. The native islander who has never left his home, the country bumpkin, adopts a most eloquent form of ambivalence toward them. The black man who has lived in France for a certain time returns home radically transformed. Genetically speaking, his phenotype undergoes an absolute definitive mutation. Even before he leaves, one senses from his almost aerial way of walking that new forces have been set in motion. When he meets a friend or colleague, gone is the expansive bear hug. Instead, a future candidate bows discreetly. The usually raucous voice gives way to a hushed murmur, for he knows that over there in France he will be struck with a stereotype of Le Havre or Marseille. I'm from Martinique. This is very first visit to France. He knows that what the poet calls divine cooing, meaning Creole, is but a term midway between Creole and French. In the French Antilles, the bourgeoisie does not use Creole, except when speaking to servants. At school, the young Martinican is taught to treat the dialect with contempt. Avoid Creolisms. Some families forbid speaking Creole at home, and mothers call their children little ragamuffins for using it. My mother wanted a memorandum, son. If you don't learn your history lesson, you'll not go to Sunday Mass. In your Sunday best, the child would be the shame of us. The child would be our God damn it. Shut up. I told you you have to speak French. The French from France. The Frenchman's French. French. Yes, I must watch my diction, because that's how they'll judge me. He can't even speak French properly, they'll say with the utmost contempt. Among a group of young Antillians, he who can express himself, who masters a language, is the one to look out for. Be wary of him. He's almost white. In France, they say, to speak like a book. In Martinique, they say, to speak like a white man. The black man entering France reacts against the myth of the Martinican who swallows his R's. He'll go to work on it and enter into open conflict with it. He will make every effort not only to roll his R's, but also to make them stand out. On the lookout for the slightest reaction of others, listening to himself speak and not trusting his own tongue. An unfortunately lazy organ. He will lock himself in his room and read for hours, desperately working on his diction. Recently, a friend told us this story on arrival to Le Havre. A Martinican goes into a cafe and calls out with great assurance, "Waiter, bring me a drink of beer." This is a case of genuine intoxication. Anxious not to correspond to the black man who swallows his R's, he makes use of a great many of them, but does not know how to divide them. There is a psychological phenomenon that consists in believing the world will open up its borders, as borders are broken down. The black Antillian, prisoner on his island, lost in an atmosphere without the slightest prospect, feels the call of Europe like a breath of fresh air. For we must admit that Césaire was overly generous in his notebook of a return to my native land. The city of Fort-de-France is truly lackluster and shipwrecked. Over there on the slopes of the sun is the city, flat, sprawled, tripped up by its common sense, inert, winded, under the geometric weight of its eternally renewed cross. At odds with its fate, mute, baffled, unable to circulate the pith of his ground, embarrassed, lopped, reduced, cut off from the fauna and flora. Césaire's description has nothing poetical about it. It is easy to understand, therefore, by the black man on the announcement of his entry into France, as is said of someone entering high society. Is enjoyed and decides to change. Moreover, there is nothing thematic about this change that is structural and independent of any introspection. In the United States, Pierce and Williamson have conducted an experiment called the Peckham experiment. The authors have proved that there is a biochemical modification in a married couple, and apparently they have detected in the husband certain hormones of his pregnant wife. It would be interesting if there will always be somebody willing to make a study of the black man's humoral mutation on entering France, or simply study his psyche before he leaves and then 1 month after settling into France. There is a dramatic conflict in what is commonly called the human sciences. Since we postulate a typical human reality and describe its psychic modalities, taking into account only the imperfections, or should we rather not make a constant, solid endeavor to understand man in an ever-changing light? When we read that a man loses his affective faculties starting at the age of 29 and he has to wait until he is 49 to regain them, we feel the ground give way beneath our feet. Our only hope of getting out of the situation is to pose the problem correctly, for all these findings and all this research have a single aim: to get man to admit he is nothing, absolutely nothing, and get him to eradicate this narcissism whereby he thinks he is different from the other animals. This is nothing more or less than the capitulation of man. All in all, I grasp my narcissism with both hands, and I reject the vileness of those who want to turn man into a machine. If the debate cannot be opened up on a philosophical level, i.e. the fundamental demands of human reality, I agree to place it on a psychoanalytical level. In other words, the misfires, just as we talk about an engine misfiring. The black man entering France changes because for him the metropole is the holy of holies. He changes not only because that's where his knowledge of Montesquieu, Rousseau, Voltaire comes from, but also because that's where his doctors, his departmental superiors, and innumerable little potentates come from. From the staff sergeant 15 years on the job to the gendarme of Panisieres. And excuse me, I'm not a native French speaker, so you're butchering these words here. There is a kind of spell cast from afar, and the black man who leaves in 1 week for the metropole creates an aura of magic around him where the words Paris, Marseille, the Sorbonne, Pigalle represent the high points. On departure, the amputation of his being vanishes as the ocean liner comes into view. He can read the authority and mutation he has acquired in the eyes of those accompanying him to the ship. Adieu, Madra, adieu, Fula. Now that we have accompanied him to the port, let him sail away, and we'll come back to him later on. Let us now go and meet one of those who have returned home. The new returnee, as soon as he sets foot on the island, asserts himself. He answers only in French and often no longer understands Creole. A folktale provides us with an illustration of this. After having spent several months in France, a young farmer returns home. On seeing a plow, he asks his father, an old "don't pull that kind of thing on me" peasant, "What's that thing called?" By way of an answer, his father drops the plow on his foot and his amnesia vanishes. Awesome therapy. So here is our new returnee. He can no longer understand Creole. He talks of the opera house, which he has probably seen only from a distance. But most of all, he assumes a critical attitude towards his fellow islanders. He reacts differently at the slightest pretext. He knows everything. He proves himself through his language. On the Savannah Fort de France, a meeting place for the young people, the new returnee is given the floor for a purpose. As soon as school's out, they gather on the savannah. Imagine a square 600 feet long, 120 feet wide, lined by worm-eaten tamarind trees down each side. At the top, the huge war memorial, acknowledging the mother country's gratitude to her children. And at the bottom of the central hotel, a square twisted with uneven paving, stones, and gravel that crunches underfoot, and walking up and down in it for 300 or 400 young people, greeting one another, making contact, no, never making contact, then walking on. Hi, how's it going? Hi, how's it going? Hi, how's it going? And that's been going on for 50 years. Yes, this town is a lamentable shipwreck. This life too. They meet and talk, and the new returnee is quickly given the floor because they are waiting for him. First of all, regarding form. The slightest mistake is seized upon, scrutinized, and in less than 48 hours, it will be all over Fort de France. There is no forgiving the Martinican flaunting his superiority for failing his duty. Let him say, for instance, I do not have the good fortune, when in France, of seeing gendarmes on horsebacks, and he is lost. His only choice is either to get rid of his Parisian affection or to die of ridicule. For people will never forget, once married, his wife will realize she has married a joke, and his children will have to deal with and live down the tale. Where does this change of personality come from? What can this new way of being be ascribed to? Any idiom is a way of thinking. Damouré and Pichon said. The fact that the newly returned Martinican adopts a language different from that of the community in which he is born is evidence of a shift and split. Professor Westerman writes in The African Today that the feeling of inferiority by blacks is especially evident in the educated black man who is constantly trying to overcome it. The method used, Westerman adds, is often naive. The wearing of European clothes, whether rags or the most up-to-date style, using European furniture and European forms of social intercourse, adorning the native language with European expressions, using bombastic phrases in speaking or writing a European language, all these contribute to a feeling of equality with the European and his achievements. By referring to other research and other personal observations, we would like to try to show why the black man posits himself in such a characteristic way with regard to European languages. We recall once again that our findings are valid for the French Antilles. We are well aware, however, that this same behavior can be found in any race subjected to colonialization. We have known, and unfortunately still know, comrades from Dahomey or the Congo who say they are Antillean. We have known and still know Antillians who get annoyed at being taken for Senegalese. It's because the Antillean is évolu than the French, meaning he is closer to the white man. And this difference exists not only on the street or along the boulevard, but also in the administration and the army. Any Antillean who has done military service in a colonial regiment of infantry is familiar with the distressing situation. On one side, the Europeans and the French Antillians, and on the other, the Africans. I can remember once when in the heat of action, a nest of enemy machine guns had to be wiped out. 3 times the Senegalese were ordered out, and 3 times they were forced back. Then one of the Senegalese asked why the Toubabs didn't go. In such moments, we no longer knew whether we were Toubabs or natives. For an Antillean, however, excuse me, the situation was by no means distressing, but on the contrary quite normal. That would be the last straw to put us with the niggers. The European despises the African, and the Antillean lords sit as uncontested master over the black rabble. An extreme example, but nevertheless amusing, is the following. I was recently talking to a Martinican who was incensed that certain Guadeloupeans were passing for Martinican, but he added the mistake was rapidly detected. They are more savage than we are, meaning, once again, that they are farther removed from the white man. It is said that the black man likes to palaver, and whenever I pronounce the word palaver, I see a group of boisterous children raucously and blandly calling out to the world, children at play insofar as playing can be seen as an initiation to life. The black man likes to palaver, and it is only a short step to a new theory that the black man is just a child. psychoanalysts have a field day, and the word orality is soon pronounced. But we have to look further. We cannot hope to cover the fundamental question of language here in its entirety. The remarkable research by Piaget was taught as to distinguish stages in its emergence, and the studies by Gelb and Goldstein have demonstrated that the function of language operates by steps and degrees. Here we are interested in the black man confronted by the French language. We would like to understand why the Antillean is so fond of speaking good French. In his introduction to the Anthologie de la Poésie Nègre et Malgache, Jean-Paul Sartre tells us that the black poet will turn against the French language, but this will not be the case for the Antillians. In this respect, I agree, moreover, with Michael Léry, who recently wrote on the subject of Creole. Still very much a popular language, which everyone can speak more or less, except for the illiterate who speak it exclusively, Creole seems destined sooner or later to become a relic of the past. Once education, however slow its progress, delayed by too few schools, the shortage of public libraries, and the very low standard of living, is widely accessible to the underprivileged sectors of the population. And, adds the author, for the poets I'm talking about here, it's not a question of their turning themselves into Antillians along the lines of the picturesque Provençal motto, by borrowing a language that, moreover, is devoid of any external influence, whatever might be its intrinsic qualities, by a question of asserting their personal integrity faced with whites who are steeped in the worst racial prejudice and whose arrogance clearly provides to be unfounded. There may be one Gilbert Graciant writing in Creole, but admittedly he is a rare case. Besides, the poetic worth of such writing leaves much to be desired. On the other hand, great works can be seen translated from the Wolof and Fulani, and we have been reading Sheikh Anta Diop's linguistic research and great interest. There is nothing comparable to the French Antilles. The official language is French. Elementary school teachers keep a close eye on their pupils to make sure they are not speaking Creole. We will not go into reasons why. The problem perhaps lies in the fact that the Antilles, as in Brittany, there's a dialect and there's the French language. But that can't be right, because the Britons do not consider themselves inferior to French. The Britons were never civilized by the whites. By refusing to multiply elements, we run the risk of not staying in focus. It is important, however, to tell the black man that an attitude of open rupture has never saved anybody. And although it is true, I must free myself from my strangler because I cannot breathe. Nevertheless, it is unhealthy to graft a psychological element, the impossibility of expanding, onto a psychological base, the physical difficulty of breathing. What does this mean? Quite simply this. When an Antillean with a degree in philosophy says he is not sitting for the aggregation because of his color, my response is that philosophy never saved anybody. When another desperately tries to prove to me that the black man is as intelligent as any white man, my response is that neither did intelligence save anybody. For if equality among men is proclaimed in the name of intelligence and philosophy, it is also true that these concepts have been used to justify the extermination of man. Before continuing, I believe it necessary to say one or two things. I am speaking here on the one hand of alienated, mystified blacks, and on the other of no less alienated, mystifying, and mystified whites. Although only Sartre and Cardinal Verdier have said that the scandal of the black question has gone on far too long. We must conclude that their attitude is right. We too could give multiple references and quotations showing that the color prejudice is indeed an idiocy and an antiquity that must be eradicated. Sartre begins as Black Orpheus thus: what would you expect to find when the muzzle that has silenced the voices of black men is removed? That they would thunder your praise when these heads that our fathers have forced to the very ground are risen. Do you expect to read adoration in their eyes? All I know is that anyone who tries to read in my eyes anything but a perpetual questioning won't see a thing, neither gratitude nor hatred. And if I utter a great shout, it won't be black. No, from the point of view adopted here, there is no black problem. Or at least, if there is one, the whites are only accidentally interested. Our history takes place in obscurity, and the sun I carry with me must lighten every corner. Dr. H.L. Gordon, physician of the Mathare Psychiatric Hospital in Nairobi, writes in an article in the East African Medical Journal, a highly technical, skilled examination of a series of 100 brains of normal natives has found naked eye and microscopic facts indicative of inherent new brain inferiority. Quantitatively, he adds, the inferiority amounts to 14.8%. We have said that the black man was the missing link between the ape and man, the white man, of course. And only on page 108 of this book does Sir Alan Burns come to the conclusion we are unable to accept as scientifically proven the theory that the black man is inherently inferior to the white, or that he comes from a different stock. Let us add it would be easy to prove the absurdity of such statements. The Bible says the black and the white races shall be separated in heaven, as they are on earth, and the natives admitted to the kingdom of heaven will find themselves separated to certain of our fathers' mansions mentioned in the New Testament, or else we are the chosen people. Look at the color of our skin. Others are black or yellow because of their sins. By appealing, therefore, to our humanity, to our feelings of dignity, love, and charity, it would be easy to prove and have acknowledged that the black man is equal to the white man. But that is not our purpose. Excuse me. What we are striving for is to liberate the black man from the arsenal of complexes that germinated in colonial situation. Monsieur Aquile, a teacher of Lycée du Parc in Lyon, cited a personal experience during his lecture. It is a universally familiar experience. Few black people living in France have not experienced it. As a Roman Catholic, he took part in a pilgrimage. Seeing a black face among his flock, the priest asked him, "Why you left the big savannah? Why you come with us?" Achille answered most politely, and in this story, it wasn't the young deserter of the savannah who was the most embarrassed. Everyone laughed at the exchange and the pilgrimage continued. And if we stop to reflect, we realize that the priest's usage of pidgin calls for several remarks. 1. I know black people. You have to talk to them kindly. Talk to them about their country. Knowing how to talk to them, that's the key. Now, here's what you have to do. So in this case, with the Catholic priest talking to the black man in his, similar to, someone talking in, Ebonics in America or something like that, that, that white person has proven to them how down they are. So in this case, we see that that's happening in French society as well. This is no exaggeration. A white man talking to a person of color behaves exactly like a grown-up with a kid, simpering, murmuring, fussing, and coddling. It's not just one white person we have observed, but hundreds, and our observations were not limited to one category. Insisting on a fundamentally objective attitude, we studied such behavior in physicians, police officers, and foremen on work sites. People will tell us, forgetting our aim, that we could have focused our attention elsewhere, and that there are whites who do not fit our description. Our answer to these objections is that here we are picking holes with the mystified, the mystifiers, or the alienated, and that if there are whites who interact sanely with blacks, those are precisely the cases that will not be taken into account. It's not because my patient's liver is functioning normally that his kidneys are healthy. Since his liver is found to be working normally, it's only normal for me to leave it at that and turn my attention to the kidneys. In other words, alongside normal people behaving rationally according to human psychology, there are those who behave pathologically according to an inhuman psychology. And it so happens that the existence of such a type of person has determined a number of realities that we would like to help eliminate in this study. Speaking to black people in this way is an attempt to reach down to them, to make them feel at ease, to make oneself understood and reassure them. Consulting physicians now know this. 20 European patients come and go. Please have a seat. Now what's the trouble? What can I do for you today? In comes a black man or Arab. Sit down, old fellow. Not feeling well? Where's it hurting? When it's not. You not good? 2. To speak gobbledygook to a black man is insulting, for it means he is the gook. Yet, we'll be told there is no intention to willfully give offense. Okay, but it is precisely this absence of will, this offhand manner, this casualness, and the ease with which they classify them, imprison him at an uncivilized primitive level. That is insulting. In the person who speaks to a man of color or an Arab in pidgin does not see that there is a flaw or defect in his behavior, then he has never paused to reflect. At a personal level, during certain consultations, I have felt myself lapsing. In the company of this 73-year-old peasant afflicted with senile dementia, I suddenly feel I am losing my touch. The very fact of adopting a language suitable for dementia and the mentally retarded, the fact of leaning over to address this poor 73-year-old woman, the fact of my reaching down to her for a diagnosis are the signs of a weakening in my relations with other people. He's an idealist, they'll say. Not at all. It's the others who are the scumbags. I always make a point of speaking to the towel heads in correct French, and I have always been understood. They answer as best as they can, but I refuse to indulge in any form of paternalism. Hey, no. Feel good? Show me. Belly pain? Heart hurting? Said in the accent that the hospital interns know all too well. They have a clear conscience. When the answers come back along the same lines, you see, I told you, that's how they are. In the opposite case, you need to retract your pseudopodia and behave like a man. The entire foundation collapses. A black man who says, I object, sir, to you calling me my old fellow. Now there's something new. But we can go even lower. You're sitting in a cafe in Rouen or Strasbourg, and you have the misfortune to be spotted by an old drunk. He makes a beeline for your table. You African? Dakar, Rufisque, whorehouse, women, coffee, mangoes, bananas. You get up and leave. You are greeted by a hail of insults. You didn't play big shot like that in your jungle, filthy nigger. Mr. Manoni has described what he calls to the Prospero complex. We shall return later to these findings that will allow us to understand the psychology of colonialism. But it is already safe to say that to speak pidgin means you stay where you are. When I meet a German or Russian speaking bad French, I try to indicate through the gestures the information he is asking for. But in doing so, I am careful not to forget that he has a language of his own, a country, and that perhaps he is a lawyer or an engineer back home. Whatever the case, he is a foreigner with different standards. There is nothing comparable when it comes to the black man. He has no culture, no civilization, and no long historical past. End quote. Perhaps this is why today's blacks want desperately to prove to the white world that the existence of a black civilization. Whether he likes it or not, the black man has to wear the livery the white man has fabricated for him. Look at the children's comics books. All the blacks are mouthing the ritual, "Yes, boss." In films, the situation is even more accurate. Most of the American films dubbed in French reproduce the grinning stereotype, "Ya bon banania." In one of these recent films, Steel Sharks, there's a black guy on a submarine speaking the most downright classic dialect imaginable. Furthermore, he is a true nigger, walking behind the quartermaster, trembling at the latter's slightest fit of anger, and is killed in the end. I am convinced, however, that in the original version, he did not have this way of expressing himself. And even if he did, I can't see why in a dramatic democratic France, where 60 million citizens are colored, anyone would dub the same idiocies from America. The reason is that the black man has to be portrayed in a certain way. The same stereotype can be found in the black man in Sans Petit. Me work hard, me never lie, me never steal, to the servant in the duel in the sun. And just to stop there real quick, in these depictions that in the time of Fanon, where you see in America they exported visuals of black people in America that were not true. That is true today, where negative stereotype and images of black people from America are projected internationally, where people have a certain vision of black Americans from their homelands, never having seen a black American. That's what America does. All they ask of the black man is to be a good nigger. The rest will follow on its own. Making him speak pidgin is tying him to an image, snaring him, imprisoning him as the eternal victim of his own essence, of a visible appearance for which he is not responsible. And of course, just as the Jew who is lavish with his money is suspect, so the black man who quotes Montesquieu must be watched. Let me make myself clear. Watched insofar as he might start something. Do not contend that the black student is suspect to his peers or his professors. But outside the university circles, there is an army of fools. It is a question not of educating them, of teaching the black man not to be a slave of their archetypes. Granted, these fools are the product of the psychological economic structure. But that does not get us anywhere. When a black man speaks of Marx, the first reaction is the following: "We educated you. Now you are turning against your benefactors, ungrateful wretches. You'll all be disappointment. And then there's a sledgehammer argument from the plantation owners of Africa. Our enemy is the elementary school teacher. The fact is that the European has a set idea of the black man, and there is nothing more exasperating than to hear, "How long have you lived in France? You speak such good French." It could be argued that this is due to the fact that a lot of black people speak pidgin. But that would be too easy. You're traveling by train and ask, "Excuse me, could you please tell me where the restaurant car is?" "Yes, sonny boy. You go corridor, you go straight, go one car, go two car, go three car, you there." Let's be serious. Speaking pidgin means imprisoning the black man and perpetuating a conflictual situation where the white man infects the black man with extremely toxic foreign bodies. There is nothing more sensational than a black man speaking correctly, for he is appropriating the white world. I often have conversations with foreign students. They speak French badly, like Robinson Crusoe, alias Prospero in his element. He explains, informs, comments, and helps them with their studies. But with the black man, he is utterly stupefied. The black man has put himself on equal footing. The game is no longer possible. He's a pure replica of the white man, who has to surrender to the facts. After everything that has been said, it is easy to understand why the first reaction of the black man is to say no to those who endeavor to define him. It is understandable that the black man's first action is a reaction, and since he is assessed with regarding to his degree of assimilation, it is understandable too why the returning Antillean speaks only French, because he is striving to underscore the rift that has occurred. He embodies a new type of man whom he imposes on his colleagues and family. His old mother no longer understands when he speaks of her PJs, her ramshackle dump, and her lousy joint. All that embellished with the appropriate accent. In every country in the world, there are social climbers, those who think they have arrived. And opposite them, there are those who keep the notion of their origins. The Antillean returning from the metropole speaks in Creole if he wants to signify that nothing has changed. It can be sensed on the docks where friends and relatives are waiting for him not only in a literal sense, but in the sense of watching to catch him out. They need only 1 minute to make their diagnosis. If he says, "I am so happy to be back among you. Good Lord, it's so hot in this place. I'm not sure I can put up with it for long." They have been forewarned. It's a European who has come back. This is deep. This is deep. In a different respect, when a group of Antillean students meet in Paris, they have two options. Either support the white world, i.e. the real world, and with the help of the French, be able to address certain issues and aim at a certain degree of universalism in their conclusions, or reject Europe, and come together thanks to Creole by settling uncomfortably in what we'll call the Martinican Umwelt. By this we mean, and this goes especially for our Antillean brothers, that when one of our comrades in Paris or another university town attempts to address a problem in all seriousness, he is accused of putting on airs. And the best way of disarming him is to brandish the Antillean and shift into Creole. This is one of the reasons why so many friendships fall through after a few months of life in Europe. Since our argument is the disalienation of blacks, we would like them to realize that every time there is a breakdown in understanding among themselves, faced with the white world, there is a lack of judgment. A Senegalese who learns Creole to pass for an Antillean is a case of alienation. Antillians who make mockery out of him are lacking in judgment. As we have seen, we are not mistaken in thinking that a study of the Antillean's language can reveal several characteristics of his world. As we said at the beginning, there are mutual supports between language and the community. To speak a language is to appropriate its world and culture. The Antillean who wants to be white will succeed, since he will have adopted the cultural tool of language. I can remember just over a year ago in Lyon, following a lecture where I had drawn a parallel between black and European poetry. A French comrade telling me enthusiastically, "Basically, you're a white man." The fact I had studied such an interesting question in the white man's language gave me my credentials. It should be understood that historically the black man wants to speak French, since it is the key to open doors which only 50 years ago still remained closed to him. The Antillean, who falls within our description, goes out of his way to seek the subtleties and rarities of the language, a way of proving himself to that he is culturally adequate. It has been said that the Antillean orator has a power of expression which leaves the Europeans gasping. In 1945, during an electoral campaign, Aimé Césaire, who was running for parliament, was speaking at a boys' school in Fort-de-France, in front of a packed auditorium. In the middle of his talk, a woman fainted. The next day, a colleague describing the event commented, "His French was so dynamite, the woman fell to the floor and started catching Malkadi," the power of language. A few other facts deserve closer attention. For instance, M. Charles André Julien, introducing Aimé Césaire as a black poet with a university aggregation, or else quite simply the expression "a great black poet." These ready-made phrases that seem to be common sense, after all, Aimé Césaire is a black and a poet, contain a hidden nuance, a persistent crutch. I know nothing about Jean Paulhan except that he writes interesting books. I have no idea how old Roger Caillois is. The only evidence I have of him is when his presence streaks across the sky from time to time. And let no one accuse me of affective anaphylaxis when I mean to say that there is no reason why Monsieur Breton should say of Césaire, "Here is a black man who handles the French language unlike any white man today." And even if Monsieur Breton were telling the truth, I don't see where the paradox lies. I don't see why there should be any emphasis, because after all, Aimé Césaire is Martinican with a university aggregation. Let us return to Léry. If in the Antillean writer there is a desire to break with the literary forms associated with official education, such a desire, striving towards a freer future, would not assume the appearance of folklore, seeing above all in literature to formulate a message that is their very own, and in the case of some of them at least, to be the spokesman of a real race with unrecognized potential. They scorn the artifice which for them, whose intellectual education has been almost exclusively French, would represent recourse to a language they could only use as a second language they have learned. But blacks will retort, "We should be honored that a white man such as Breton writes such good things about us. Let us move on." Chapter 2. Woman of color and the white man. Let's check in with the chat. All right. Peace, family. Peace, family. Belu, Belu, Belu. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Thank you for joining us, family. Make sure you like and subscribe. Support the Cash App. Support TransAtlantic Productions. Shout out to the family. Check in with the chat. Let us know where you are sending us from. We will try to get through this book in this reading as we did The Way of the Orisha. This is Black Skin, White Mass by Frantz Fanon. And bear with me as I trudge through the French, my bad French pronunciations. And shout out to the family. Like, share, subscribe, support the Cash App for this reading. Take a swig here. Chapter 2. Excuse me. The Woman of Color and the White Man. Bear with, sorry about that, family. Lost my space real quick. These pages get kind of sticky. Man is propelled toward the world and his kind, a movement of aggressiveness engendering servitude or conquest, a movement of love, a gift of self, the final stage of what is commonly called ethical orientation. Every consciousness seems to be able to show evidence of these two elements, simultaneously or alternatively. My beloved will support me energetically in assuming my virility, whereas the need to earn the admiration or love of others will weave a valorizing web over my vision of the world. In understanding phenomena of this order, the analyst, the phenomenologist, have a tough job. And though we have Sartre for portraying failed love, being and nothingness is but the analysis of bad faith and inauthenticity. The fact remains, nevertheless, that true love, real love, i.e., wishing for others what one postulates for oneself when this postulate integrates the permanent values of human reality, requires the mobilization of psychological agencies liberated from unconscious tensions. The ultimate sequels of gigantic struggle waged against the other have long vanished. Today we believe in the possibility of love, and that is the reason why we are endeavoring to trace its imperfections and perversions. In this chapter, devoted to the relationship between the woman of color and the European male, we shall attempt to determine to what extent authentic love remains impossible as long as this feeling of inferiority or this Adlerian exaltation, this overcompensation that seems to be indicative of the black Weltanschauung, has been purged. For after all, when we read, I am a Martinican woman, I would have liked to marry, but with a white man. Only a colored woman is never quite respectable in the eyes of a white man, even if he loves her. I knew well. Well, we have every right to be concerned. This excerpt that, in a sense, brings to a culmination a huge mystification is food for thought. One day, a woman by the name of Mayotte Capacia, obeying a motivation whose reasons are difficult to grasp, sat down and wrote 202 pages on her life, in which the most ridiculous ideas proliferated at random. The enthusiastic reception the book received in certain circles obliges us to analyze it. For us, there is no doubt whatsoever that I am a Martinican woman is a third-rate book advocating the unhealthy behavior. Mayotte loves a white man unconditionally. He is her lord. She asks for nothing, demanding nothing, except for a little whiteness in her life. And when she asks herself whether he is handsome or ugly, she writes, "All I know is that he had blue eyes, blonde hair, a pale complexion, and I loved him." If we reword these same terms, it is not difficult to come up with. I loved him because he had blue eyes, blonde hair, and a pale complexion. And we Antillians, we know only too well that, as they say in the islands, the black man has a fear of blue eyes. Well, we said in our introduction that the inferiority had been historically felt as being economic. We were not mistaken. Some evenings, alas, he had to leave me to fulfill mundane duties. He went to Didier, the elegant section of Fort-de-France, where the Martinican Beques, who perhaps were not pure white, but often very rich. It is accepted that one is white if one has a certain amount of money, and the French Beques, for most part, officials and officers lived. Among André's comrades, who like him were blockaded in the Antilles by the war, some had managed to have their wives come over. I understood that I guess it's Henri, no, is it André? Help me out in the chat, y'all. Could not remain apart. I also accepted not being admitted to this group since I was a colored woman, but I couldn't get help being jealous. I was useless for him, and to explain to me that his private life, since I was a colored woman, but I couldn't help being jealous. It was useless for him to explain to me that his private life was something that belonged to him, and that his social and military another, over which he had no control. I insisted so much that one day he took me to Didier. We spent the evening in one of the villas that I admired since childhood, with two officers and their wives. These women treated me with a forbearance that was unsupportable for me. I felt too heavily made up, inappropriately dressed, that I didn't do justice to Andre, perhaps simply due to the color of my skin. Indeed, I spent such an unpleasant evening that I decided never again to ask Andre to accompany him again. All our Creole beauties desires to turn toward Didier, the boulevard of Martinican dreams. She herself says that one is white if one has a certain amount of money. The villas of the Didier neighborhood have long fascinated the author. Furthermore, we have the impression that Mayotte Capisha has deluded us into thinking that she got to know Fort-de-France only when she was 18, yet the villas of Didier had fascinated her since childhood. This inconsistency is understandable once the fact is contextualized. It is commonplace in Martinique to dream of whitening oneself magically as a way of salvation. A villa in Didier, acceptance into high society. Didier is on a hill dominating the city, and you have achieved Hegel's subjective certainty. Moreover, it is quite easy to see the place that the dialectic of being and having would occupy in description of such behavior. Such, however, is not yet the case of Mayotte. She is snubbed. Things begin to fall into place. She is not tolerated in certain circles because she is a colored woman. Her facticity was the starting point for her resentment. We shall see why love is out of bounds for the Mayotte Capishas of the world. Instead of allowing them to fulfill their infantile fantasies, the other should help them get over these fantasies. There are a number of characteristics in Mayotte Capisha's childhood that point to the author's later orientations. And every time there's a clash or conflict, it will always be in direct relation with this objective. Apparently for her, black and white represent the two poles of this world, poles in perpetual conflict. A genuinely Manichaean notion of the world. There, we've said it. Black or white? That is the question. I am white. In other words, I embody beauty and virtue, which have never been black. I am the color of day. I am black. I am in total fusion with the world, in sympathetic affinity with the earth, losing my ID in the heart of the cosmos and the white man. However intelligent he may be, is incapable of understanding Louis Armstrong or songs from the Congo. I am black not because of a curse, but because my skin has been able to capture all the cosmic effluvia. I am truly a drop of sun under the earth. And there, we are in a hand-to-hand struggle with our blackness or our whiteness, in a drama of narcissistic proportions, locked in our own particularity, admittedly with a few glimmers of hope from time to time that are constantly at risk from the source. First of all, this is how Mayotte sees the problem at the age of 5 at the beginning of the book. I took out my inkwell and threw it, showering his head. This was her way of changing whites into blacks. But we realized early on how vain her efforts were. Then there are Lulu's and her mother, who told her how difficult life is for a woman of color. So, unable to blacken or negrify the world, she endeavors to whiten it in her body and mind. First of all, she becomes a laundress. I charged more than others, but I did better work, and since Forts de France liked clean linen, they patronized me. In the end, they were proud to have their linens become whiter at Mayotte's. We regret that Mayotte Capisha has told us nothing about her dreams. The contact with her unconscious would have helped matters. Instead of acknowledging that she is black, she turns the fact into an accident. She learns that her grandmother is white. I was proud of that. Surely, I was not the only one to have white blood, but a white grandmother was less commonplace than a white grandfather. So then, my mother was a métisse. I guess that's mestizo. I should have suspected this because of her pale complexion. I found her prettier than ever, more refined, more distinguished. If she had married a white man, would I perhaps have been all white, and would life have been less difficult for me? I gave careful thought to this grandmother, whom I had never known, and who died because she loved a colored man, a Martinican. How could a Canadian woman love a Martinican? I, who was still thinking about the father, decided that I could only love a white man, a blonde with blue eyes, a Frenchman. We have been forewarned. Mayotte is striving for lactification. In a word, the race must be whitened. Every woman in Martinique knows this, and says this, and reiterates it. Whiten the race, save the race, but not along the lines you might think. Do not safeguard the originality of that part of the world in which they grew up, but ensure its whiteness. Every time we have wanted to analyze certain kinds of behavior, we have come up against some nauseating phenomena. The number of phrases, proverbs, and pickup lines a lover in the Antilles chooses is extraordinary. The crux of the problem is not to slip back among the nigger rabble, and any Antillean woman in her flirtations and her liaison will prefer the lighter-skinned man. Sometimes, in order to apologize for a bad choice, she is obliged to use the following argument. X is black, but misery is blacker. We know a lot of girls from Martinique, students in France, who confess a lily-white innocence that they would never marry a black man. Choose to go back there once you've escaped? No, thank you. This has been going on a long time, folks. This type of thinking, because we know that this exists today. Besides, they add, it's not that we want to downplay the credentials of the black man, but it's better to be white. Recently, we were talking with one of them who has a last resort hurled. Besides, if Césaire claims his blackness loud and clear, it's because he senses full well there is a curse on it. Do the whites make such a fuss about their color? There is a white potential in every one of us. Some want to ignore it, or quite simply reverse it. Me, I would never accept to marry a nigger for anything in the world. Such attitudes are quite common, and I admit I am worried because in a few years' time, this Martinican woman will graduate and return home to the French Antilles to teach. It is not hard to guess what will come from that. A huge task confronts the French Antillean, who has previously gone through the prejudice at home with a fine-tooth comb of objectivity. When I began this book, having completed my medical studies, I thought of submitting it as my thesis, and then the dialectic required that I develop my position further. Although in one way or another, I had tackled the psychic alienation of the black man, I would not ignore certain elements, however psychological they may be, which generate consequences in the realm of sciences. Every experience, especially if it turns out to be sterile, has to become a component of reality and consequently play a part in the restructuring of this reality. In other words, the patriarchal European family, with its flaws, failings, and vices, in close contact with the society we know, produces about 30% of neurotics. On the basis of psychoanalytical, sociological, and political data, it is a question of building a new family environment capable of reducing, if not eliminating, the percentage of waste in the antisocial sense of the term. In other words, the question is whether the basic personality is a constant or variable. All these frenzied women of color, frantic for a white man, are waiting. And one of these days, they will catch themselves not wanting to look back, while dreaming of a wonderful night, a wonderful lover, a white man. Perhaps they too one day will realize that the white men don't marry black women. But that's the risk they have accepted. And what they need is whiteness at any cost. Why? Nothing could be simpler. Here is a story that is music to their ears. One day, St. Peter sees three men arriving at the gates of paradise. A white man, a mulatto, and a black man. What do you want most in this world? He asked the white man. Money. And you? Oh my God. Wait, hang on. Sorry, family. Money. And this is the white man's response. And you? He asked the mulatto. Glory. And as he turns toward the black man, the latter declares with a wide grin, I'm just carrying these bags, I'm just carrying these gentlemen's bags. I think I butchered that joke. Quite recently, Etiambo talk about one of his disappointing experiences. I was stupefied as an adolescent when a woman who knew me well stood up gravely offended on hearing me say to her in circumstances where the word was the only one appropriate, "Now you are a negress." Me? A negress? Can't you see I'm almost white? I hate niggers. Niggers stink. They're dirty and lazy. They don't ever mention niggers to me. We knew another girl who kept the list of where you never risk meeting another nigger: Parisian dance clubs. The issue is knowing whether the black man can overcome his feeling of abasement and expunge the compulsive characteristics that resemble so much of the phobic. There is an effective exacerbation in the black man, a rage at feeling diminished, and inadequacy in human communication that confine him to an unbearable insularity. Describing the phenomenon of self-withdrawal, Anna Freud writes, as a method of avoiding pain, ego restriction, like the various forms of denial, does not come under the heading of the psychology of neurosis, but is a normal stage in the development of the ego. When the ego is young and plastic, its withdrawal from one field of activity is sometimes compensated for by excellence in another, upon which it concentrates. But when it has become rigid and has already acquired an intolerance of pain, and so obsessionally fixated to a method of flight with withdrawal, is punished by impaired development. By abandoning one position for another, it becomes one-sided, loses too many interests, and can show but a meager achievement. We understand now why the black man cannot take pleasure in his insularity. For him, there is only one way out, and it leads to the white world. Hence, his constant preoccupation with attracting the white world, his concern with being as powerful as the white man, and his determination to acquire the properties of a coding, i.e., the part of being or having that constitutes an ego. As we said earlier, the black man will endeavor to seek admittance to the white sanctuary from within. His attitude takes us back to his intention. The withdrawal of the ego as a successful defensive mechanism is impossible for the black man. He needs white approval. In full mythical ecstasy, carried away to another world by the hymns, Mayotte Capisha imagines herself a pink-cheeked angel. But there is the film Green Pastures, where God and the angels are black, that gave the author a terrible shock. How can God be conceived with Negro features? That's not my idea of paradise. But, after all, it's only an American film. How could the good and merciful Lord be black? He's a white man with bright pink cheeks. From black to white, that is the way to go. One is white, so one is rich, so one is handsome, so one is intelligent. Meanwhile, Andre has moved on to other climes, carrying with him the white message to other Mayottes, delightful little blue-eyed jeans pedaling down the corridor of chromosomes. But, as the good white man he has left instructions. He is talking about our child. You will raise him. You will tell him about me. You will say to him, he was a superior man. You must strive to be worthy of him. There is no need to acquire it. This worthiness was now woven into the labyrinth of the child's arteries and wedged into his little pink nails, ingrained and white. And about the father, here is what the ensemble says about him. A fine specimen of his species, he talked of family work, motherland, and our good Pétain and our good Lord, which allowed him to get her pregnant in all due form. God has used us, said the handsome bastard, the handsome white man, the handsome officer. Then I'll ditch her, according to the same sanctimonious Pétainist rules. Before we finish with the woman, whose white lord is as good as dead, who surrounds herself with the dead, in a book where lamentable dead things are moping about, we would like to ask Africa to send us a messenger. And we don't have to wait long. Abdoulaye Sadji, whose Nini gives us description of how blacks can behave in contact with Europeans. As we have said, there are nigrophobes. Moreover, it is not the hatred of the black man that drives them. They don't have the guts. Hatred is not a given. It is a struggle to acquire hatred, which has to be dragged into being, clashing with acknowledged guilt complexes. Hatred cries out to exist, and he who hates must prove his hatred through action and the appropriate behavior. It is, in a sense, he has to embody hatred. This is why the Americans have replaced lynching by discrimination. Each side keeps to his own. So we are not surprised that in the cities of French, sub-Saharan Africa, there is a European district. Mounier's book, L'Éveil des Afriques Noires, have already captured our attention, but we were waiting impatiently for our African voice. Thanks to Alain Job's journal, we have been able to coordinate the psychological motivations that drive men of color. There is a sense of wonder, in the strictly religious sense of the word, in the following extract. M. Campion is the only white man in St. Louis to frequent the St. Louisian Club, a man of certain standing since he is a civil engineer and deputy director of public works in Senegal. He is said to have the African's interest at heart, more so even than Emrodi, a teacher at the Lycée Faidherbe, excuse me for butchering that again, family, who give a lecture on the equality of races at the St. Louisian Club. Their goodness of heart is a constant topic of heated discussion. In any case, M. Campion is a regular visitor to the club, where he has had the opportunity to meet natives who are on their best behavior and who are extremely deferential toward him, like him, and feel honored by his presence. The author, who is an elementary school teacher in Africa, is indebted to M. Rodin for his lecture on racial equality. For us, such a situation is intolerable. One can understand the grievances presented to Mounier by young Africans who had the opportunity of meeting him. It's Europeans like you we need here. One senses at every moment that the fact of meeting and understanding Tubob for black folks represents a hope for a better entente. By analyzing a few extracts from Abdoulaye Sadji's novel, we shall attempt to capture on-the-spot reactions of the woman of color in contact with the European. First of all, there is the black woman and the mulatto. The black woman has only one way open to her and one preoccupation, to whiten the race. The mulatto woman wants not only to become white, but also to avoid slipping back. What in fact is more illogical than a mulatto woman marrying a black man? For you have to understand once and for all that it's a question of saving the race. Hence the turmoil in Nini's mind. A black man has been bold enough to ask her hand in marriage. A black man has gone to the extreme of writing. The love I offer you is pure and strong. It has nothing of false tenderness intended to lull you with lies and illusions. I want to see you happy, completely happy, in a setting to frame your qualities, which I believe I know how to appreciate. I should consider it the highest of honors and the greatest of joys to have you in my house and dedicated myself to you body and soul. Your graces would illuminate my home and radiate light to the darkest corners. Furthermore, I consider you too civilized and refined to reject brutally the offer of a devoted love concerned only with assuring your happiness. This last sentence should be of no surprise to us. Normally, the mulatto woman must pitilessly reject the presumptuous black man. But since she is civilized, she will ignore the color of her lover so that she can concentrate on his devotion. Abdullah Saji describes Mokhtar, thus idealist and staunch defender of progress. Taken to the extreme, he still believes in man's sincerity, his loyalty, and he readily assumes the merit alone must triumph all over. Who is Mokhtar? He is a high school graduate, an accountant with the Waterways Company. He is writing to a silly little typist, who, nevertheless, has that generally recognized quality of being almost white. So apologies are made for taking the liberty of the writer writing such a letter. The audacity of it, perhaps the first a black man has dared commit. Apologies for daring to propose a black love to a white soul. We'll find the same René Morin, the black man's fear, timidity, and humility in his relations with the white woman, or in any case with a woman whiter than he is, just as Mayotte Capisha is prepared to accept anything from her lord and master. Andre Mokhtar makes himself the slave of Nini the mulatto girl. He is prepared to sell his soul, but the imputed man gets a blunt refusal. Nini considers the letter an insult, an offense on her white girl's honor. The man's an idiot, a scoundrel, an ill-mannered lout who needs to be taught a lesson, and she's the one who will teach him. Teach him his manners, and to be less brazen. She'll make him understand that white skins are not for niggers. As it happens, the entire mulatto cast gives vent to his indignation. There is talk of bringing charges, of having the man appear in court. We will write to the head of public works to the governor of the colony to call their attention to this man's behavior and have him dismissed in recompense for the moral havoc he has inflicted. Such a breach of principle should be punished by castration. Good Lord. And ultimately, a request is made that Mokhtar be formally reprimanded by the police, for if he resumes his morbid insanities, we will have him knocked into shape by Police Inspector Drew, whom his colleagues have nicknamed the really vicious white man. We have just seen how a girl of color reacts to a declaration of love from one of her own. Let us ask ourselves now, what happens in the case of the white man? Once again, we turn to Saji, whose very long passage devoted to the reactions produced by the marriage of a white man to a mulatto girl, we shall use as the excipient. For some time, a rumor had been spread all over St. Louis that it was of first a little whisper that went from one another, making the wrinkled faces of the old signatas glow, putting new light into their dull eyes. Then the younger women, showing the whites of their eyes and forming their heavy lips into circles, noisily conveyed the news which set off so many. "Oh, it can't be. How do you know it's true? I can't believe it. How sweet. What a scream." The news that had been running through St. Louis for a month was delightful. More delightful than all the promises in the world. It crowned a certain dream of grandeur, of distinction, which meant that all the mulattoes, ninis, nanas, nanettes, lived outside the reality of their country. They are obsessed with the dream of being wedded to a white man from Europe. One could say that all their efforts are directed to this end, but are almost never obtained. Their need to gesticulate, their love of ridiculous ostentation, their calculated theatrical sickening attitudes are just so many demonstrations of the same mania for grandeur. They must have a white man, a proper white man, and nothing but a white man. Almost all of them spend their entire lives waiting for this stroke of luck, which is anything but lucky. And it is while they are waiting that old age overtakes them and drives them into dark retreats where the dream finally turns into haughty resignation. Such delightful news. M. Derive, a white European working at the Public Records Office, is requesting the hand of Didi, a mulatto girl of darker shade. Unbelievable. The day the white man confessed his love for the mulatto girl, something extraordinary must have happened. There was recognition and acceptance into a community that seemed impenetrable. Gone was the psychological deprecation, the feeling of debasement, and its corollary of never being able to reach the light. Overnight, the mulatto girl had gone from the rank of slave to that of master. She could be recognized by her overcompensating behavior. She was no longer the girl wanting to be white. She was white. She was entering the white world. In Magie Noire, Paul Moran describes a similar phenomenon, but we have learned to be wary of Paul Moran. For a psychological point of view, it might be interesting to address the following problem. The behavior of the educated mulatto girl, especially the student, is doubly ambiguous. "I don't like black men," she says, "because he's a savage. Not savage in a cannibal sense, but savage because he lacks refinement." An abstract point of view, and when we point out that some blacks might be superior to her in this respect, she objects to their ugliness, a factitious point of view. Confronted with proof of a real black aesthetic, she fails to understand. An attempt is made to explain to her the canon. Her nostrils flare, and she is short of breath. "I can choose who I want as a husband." As a last resort, we appeal to her subjectivity. If, as Anna Freud says, the ego is driven to desperation by the amputation of all its defense mechanisms, insofar as bringing of the unconscious activities of the ego into conscious has the effect of disclosing the defensive processes and rendering them inoperative, the result of analysis is to weaken the ego still further and to advance the pathological process. But in our case, the ego does not need to defend itself, since its claims have been ratified. Didi is marrying a white man. Yet, every rose has its thorn, whose families had been scorned. 3 or 4 mulatto girls had been given mulatto partners, whereas all the others had white escorts. This was considered in particular an insult to the entire family, an insult, moreover, that demanded reparation. For these families had been humiliated in their most legitimate aspirations. The mutilation they had undergone affected the very rhythm of their lives, the nervous tension, and their existence. Deep down, they wanted to change, to evolve. They were denied this right. In any case, they were robbed of it. So, what can we say following these descriptions? Whether it was Mayotte Capicia, the Martinican, or Nini of Saint Louis, the same process can be observed. A bilateral process, an attempt at securing through internalization the once forbidden values. It is because the black woman feels inferior that she aspires to gain admittance to the white world. She will be helped in this endeavor by a phenomenon that we shall call affective erethism. This work represents 7 years of experiences and observations. Whatever the field we studied, we struck by the fact that both the black man, slave to his inferiority, and the white man, slave to his superiority, behave along neurotic lines. As a consequence, we have been led to consider their alienation with reference to psychoanalytic descriptions. The black man's behavior is similar to an obsessional neurosis, or, if you prefer, he places himself in the very thick of situational neurosis. There is an attempt by the colored man to escape his individuality, to reduce his being in the world to nothing. Whenever a colored man protests, there is alienation. Whenever a colored man castigates, there is alienation. We shall see later in chapter 6 the inferiorized black man goes from humiliating insecurity to self-accusation and even despair. The attitude of the black man toward the white man, or toward his fellow blacks, often reproduces a delirious constellation that borders on pathological. Some will argue that there is nothing psychotic in the blacks we have mentioned here. Nevertheless, we would like to quote two highly significant characteristics. A few years back, we knew a black medical student. We had the infernal impression of not being appreciated for his true worth. Not at the university level, he would say, but from a human point of view. He had the infernal impression that he would never be accepted as a colleague by the white physicians or as a doctor by his European patients. In these moments of delirious intuition, the prolific moments of his psychosis, he would get drunk. And then one day, he enlisted in the army as a medical auxiliary. And he added, "Not for anything in the world would I agree to being sent to the colonies for being posted to a colonial unit." He wanted to have whites under his orders. He was a boss, and as such, he must be feared and respected. What he wanted, in fact, what he was aiming for, was to make the whites adopt a black attitude toward him. In this way, he would be avenged for the imago that had always obsessed him. The frightened, humiliated nigger trembling in front of the white master. We once knew a comrade, a customs inspector in a French port, who was extremely harsh with tourists or shipping agents because he would say, if you're not, they would take you for a piece of shit. Since I'm a nigger, for them, it's one and the same. In understanding human nature, Adler writes, when we demonstrate cases, it is frequently convenient to show relationships between the childhood impressions and the actual complaint. This is best done by a graph. We will succeed in many cases in being able to plot this graph of life. The spiritual curve along which the entire movement of an individual has to take place. The equation of the curve is the behavioral pattern, which this individual has followed since the earliest childhood. Actually, we see this behavior pattern whose final configuration is subject to some changes, but whose essential content, whose energy and meaning remain unchanged from the earliest childhood. As the determining factor, even though the relations to the adult environment may tend to modify in some instances. We are jumping ahead. And already we can see that Adler's psychology of behavioral disorders will help us understand the black man's notion of the world. Since the black man is a former slave, we shall turn to Hegel and conclude Freud too will make a useful contribution. Nini, meiotic capitia, two types of behavior that are food for thought. Are there no other possibilities? But these are pseudo-suggestions, questions that will not be addressed. We will argue, moreover, that any criticism of being implies an answer, provided one can offer an answer to one's fellow man, i.e. to a free agent. What we can say is that the flaw must be expelled once and for all. And that appears to conclude Chapter 2, Women of Color and the White Man. And we will move on to Chapter 3, The Man of Color and the White Man. So you want to stay tuned there. Peace and blessings to the family. Peace and blessings to the family. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Please like, share, and subscribe. If you have any recommendations as far as any books you would like to see read here on TransAtlantic Productions, let me know. Then drop a comment, like, share, and then drop a comment in the chat, and let me know what you think of this reading. Check in where you're calling from, where you're coming in from. And also support this reading with a Cash App. Any donation would be appreciated, family. And we will move quickly on to Chapter 3, The Man of Color and the White Woman. Hold on to your hats, y'all. Out of the blackest part of my soul, through the zone of hatchers, surges up this desire to be suddenly white. I want to be recognized as black, not as black, but as white. But, and this is the form of recognition that Hegel never described, who better than the white woman to bring this about? By loving me, she proves to me that I am worthy of white love. I am loved like a white man. I am a white man. Her love opens the illustrious path that leads to total fulfillment. I espouse white culture, white beauty, whiteness. Between these white breasts that my wandering hands fondle, white civilization and worthiness become mine. 30 years ago, a black man of the darkest hues, in full coitus, with a vivacious blonde, exclaimed at the moment of orgasm, "Long live Schoelcher." When we recall that it was Schoelcher who had the Third Republic vote for the abortion of slavery, we realized that we needed to dwell on somewhat on the likely relations between the black man and the white woman. People will argue that this anecdote has not been verified, but the fact that it has taken shape and survived through the years is an unmistakable indication that it addresses a tension, explicit or latent, but real. Its persistence underscores the fact that the black world subscribes to it. In other words, when a story survives in folklore, it expresses in some way a region of the local soul. By analyzing I Am a Martinican Woman and Nini, we have seen how the black woman behaves toward the white male. With a novel By Rene Morin, apparently an autobiography, we shall endeavor to understand the case of the black man. Jean Venu is a magnificent example that will allow us to study in depth the attitude of the black man. Jean Venu is a Negro of Antillean origin. He has lived in Bordeaux for many years, so he is a European, but he is black, so he's a Negro. This is the crux of the matter. He does not understand his race, and the whites don't understand him. The Europeans in general, he says, and the French in particular, do not merely ignore the Negro from their colonies, but also haven't a clue about the black man they have shaped in their image. The author's personality is not revealed as much as one would like. As an orphan and a boarder in a provincial lycée, he is obliged to spend his vacation stuck at school. On even the slightest holiday, his friends and comrades scatter to the four corners of France, whereas our little Negro gets used to ruminating alone, and as a result his best friends are his books. I would even go as far as to say that there is a certain recrimination, as well as a certain resentment, and barely retained aggressiveness in the long, overly long list of travel companions that the author gives us. I said I would go so far, and so here goes. Take a swig here. Incapable of integrating, incapable of going unnoticed, he starts conversing with the dead, or at least the absent. And unlike his life, his conversation skims through centuries and over oceans. Marcus Aurelius, Joinville, Pascal, Perez Galdós, Rabindranath Tagore. If we absolutely have to give Jean Venu an epithet, we would describe him as an introvert. Others would say a sensitive person. But one who saves the moment to come out on top as regards ideas and knowledge. It's a fact that his friends and comrades hold him with high esteem. What a perpetual dreamer. My old pal Venu is a real character. He never takes his nose out of his books except to scribble all over his notebooks. But a sensitive person who can go from singing in Spanish to translating into English nonstop, shy but also anxious. As I was leaving them, I heard Davandra say to him, "A good kid that Venu, somewhat gloomy and taciturn by nature, but most helpful. You can trust him. You'll see. He's a Negro we would like a lot of white boys to be like." Yes, anxious, all right. Uneasy with his body. We know furthermore that René Morin cultivates a love for André Gide. We thought, oh wow, un homme pareil à autre might end up the same as La Porte Étroite. That departure, the tone of emotional suffering, of moral hopelessness, seemed to echo the story of Jérôme and Alissa. But there is the fact that Venu is black. He is a solitary creature. He's a thinker. And when a woman attempts to flirt with him, you're dealing with an old bear. Be careful, my dear. It's all very well to be brave, but you're going to compromise yourself if you continue attracting attention this way. A Negro, bah! He doesn't count. Associating with anybody of the race is disgracing yourself. Above all, he wants to prove to others that he is a man, that he is like them. But let us not be misled. Jean Venu is the man to be convinced. It is in the very depths of his soul, as complex as any European's, that his uncertainty dwells. Forgive us the expression, but Jean Vanu is the man to be slaughtered. We shall do our best. After having quoted Stendhal and the phenomenal crystallization, he claims he loves André spiritually in Madame Coulange and physically in Clary. It's crazy, but that's how it is. I love Clary. I love Madame Coulange. Although I never really think of either of them. For me, they are merely excuses for deluding myself. I study André in them to know her by heart. I don't know. I really don't know. I am not interested in finding out anything, or rather, just one thing I do know is that the black man is just like any other man, equal to any other man, and that is his heart, which appears simple only to the ignorant. It is as complex as the most complex of Europeans. The simplicity of the Negro is a myth created by superficial observers. I love Clary, I love Madame Coulange, and it's André Marais I love. She alone and nobody else. Who's André Marais? You know, the daughter of Louis Marais, the poet. But here is our black man, who, through his intelligence and hard work, has hoisted himself to the level of European thought and culture, but is incapable of escaping his race. André Marais is white, so any solution seems impossible. Yet the fact of associating Peyo, Guide, Moriat, and Voltaire would seem to have eradicated all that. In all good faith, Jean Vanu believed in this culture and began to love this new world he had discovered and conquered for his own usage. What a terrible mistake. All it took was for him to come of age and go and serve his adopted motherland in the country of his ancestors to make him wonder whether he had been betrayed by everything around him, white folks refusing to accept him as one of their own, and black folk virtually repudiating him. Feeling he would be unable to live without love, Jean Vanu dreams into his being through poetry. When you fall in love, you must never say so. Better to keep it a secret from oneself. André Marais has written to him that she loves him, but Jean Vanu needs authorization. He needs a white man to say, "Take my sister." Vanu asks his friend, Coulange, a number of questions. Here, more or less, in extenso, is Coulange's answer. Oh boy, once again you are asking me for advice, and once again I'm going to give you my opinion once and for all. Let us proceed in a logical fashion. Your situation, as you have described to me, is very clear. Allow me nevertheless to clear the ground. It will be all to your good. How old were you when you left your country for France? 3 or 4, I believe. You have never seen your island home since, and have not the slightest interest in seeing it again. Ever since you have always lived in Bordeaux, since becoming the colonial civil servant, you spend most of your administrative leave in Bordeaux. In short, you are really one of us. Perhaps you don't fully realize it, except the fact that you are a Frenchman from Bordeaux. Get that into your thick head. You know nothing about your fellow Antilleans. I would even be surprised if you managed to get along with them. Furthermore, you have nothing in common with the ones I know. In fact, you are like us. You are us. You think like us. You act like us. You think yourself black, and others think of you as such. Big mistake. You only look like a black. For everything else, you think like a European. That's why it's only normal for you to love like a European. Since the European male loves only European females, you can hardly marry anyone else but a woman from the country where you have lived, a girl from our good old France, your one true country. That being the case, let us turn to the subject of your last letter. On the one hand, we have a certain Jean Venu who is your very image, and on the other, Mademoiselle André Marais. André Marais, who is white of skin, loves Jean Venu, who is very, very dark, adores André Marais. That doesn't stop you from asking me what you should do, you charming idiot. When you get back to France, go straight to the father of the girl whom you hardly think of yours, and striking your breast, savagely shout, I love her, she loves me, we love each other, I want her as my wife, otherwise I will kill myself at your feet. When he is approached, the white man accepts, therefore, to give him his sister on one condition. You have nothing in common with a real Negro. You are not black. You are very, very dark. This practice is all too familiar to students of color in France. There is a general refusal to consider them as authentic Negroes. The Negro is a savage, whereas the student is civilized. You are us, Coulange, tells Jean Venu. And if they take you for a Negro, it is a mistake. You only look like one. But Jean Venu does not or cannot accept this, for he knows, and he knows that. Furious at this humiliating ostracism, the common mulatto and black man have only one thought on their mind as soon as they set foot in Europe, to gratify their appetite for white women. Most of them, including those of lighter skin, who often go so far as denying both their country and their mother, marry less for love than for the satisfaction of dominating a European woman, spiced with a certain taste for arrogant revenge. And so I wonder whether I'm any different from the rest, and if I marry you, a European woman, I wonder whether I won't look as though I am stating that not only do I despise women of my own race, but drawn by the desire for white flesh that has been off limits to us since the white man rules the world. I am unconsciously endeavoring to take my revenge on the European female for everything her ancestors have inflicted on my people throughout the centuries. With a lot of trouble to free himself of a subjective urgency. I am a white man. I was born in Europe. All my friends are white. There weren't 8 blacks in the town where I live. I think in French. France is my religion. I'm a European. Do you understand? I'm not a Negro. And to prove it, I'm going away as a civil servant to show the real Negroes the difference between them and me. Pay close attention. When reading the book again, you will be convinced. Who's that knocking on the door? Ah, yes, of course. Is that you, Sewell? Yes, sir. What do you want? Roll call. 5 guards outside. 17 prisoners. Nobody missing. Anything else apart from that? No news of the mail? No, sir. Monsieur Venu, his native quarters, he has a young native girl in his hut. And to the Africans who appear to regret his departure, he feels that the only thing to say would be, please go away, please go away. You can't see how miserable I am at having to leave you. Please go away. I will not forget you. I am leaving because this country is not mine and because I feel too lonely, too empty, too deprived of all of the comforts I need, but that you, luckily you, do not yet require. When we read such a passage, we can't help but thinking, Feli Ebue, undeniably black, who under the same conditions understood his duty from quite a different angle. Jean Venu is not a Negro, and does not want to be a Negro. Yet, unbeknownst to him, a hiatus has occurred. There is something indefinable, irreversible, indeed, that within of Harold Rosenberg. Louis Anquetil, in his address to the Interracial Conference of 1949, said, "Insofar as truly interracial marriage is concerned, one can legitimately wonder to what extent it may not represent for the colored spouse of kind of subjective consecration to wiping out in himself and in his own mind of color prejudice from which he has suffered so long. It would be interesting to investigate this in a given number of cases, and perhaps to seek this clouded motivation and underlying reason for certain interracial marriages entered into some of the normal conditions of a happy household. Some men or some women, in effect, by choosing partners of another race, marry persons of a class or culture inferior to their own, whom they would not have chosen as spouses in their own race, and whose chief asset seems to be the assurance that the partner will achieve denaturalization to use the loathsome word, deracialization among certain people of color. The fact that they are marrying someone of the white man's race seems to have overridden every other consideration. In this fact, they find access to complete equality with the illustrious race, the master of the world, the ruler of peoples of color." We know that historically the Negro found guilty of sleeping with a white woman was castrated. The black man who has possessed a white woman is cast out by his fellows. The man has a tendency to visualize such a sexual obsession. The archetype of Brer Rabbit in Uncle Remus, who represents the black man, gravitates along these lines. Will he manage to bed the two daughters of Mrs. Meadows? There are ups and downs, all told by a jovial, easygoing, laughing Negro, the ingratiating, grinning Negro. While we were very slowly awakening to the shock of puberty, we were made to admire one of our own returning from the metropole, a young Parisian girl on his arm. We will endeavor to analyze this problem in another chapter. In recent conversations with Antillean men, we learn that their preoccupation on setting foot in France was to sleep with a white woman. Barely off the ship in Le Havre, they head for the bordellos. Once they have achieved the ritual initiation into authentic manhood, they take the train to Paris. But in our case here, we need to interrogate Jean Vanu. In order to do this, we shall make wide use of Germain's Gaux's book, Le Neuf d'Abandon. I'm butchering these words, family. Forgive me. Castrating what he calls the abandonment neurosis, which is pre-Oedipal in nature, with the real post-Oedipal conflicts described by orthodox Freudians. The author analyzes two types, the first of which seems to illustrate the case of Jean Vanu. The symptomatology of this form of neurosis is based upon the tripod of the anxiety aroused by the abandonment, the aggressivity to which it gives rise, and the resultant devaluation of self. We have made an introvert out of Jean Vanu. We know characterologically, or better, phenomenologically, that autistic thinking can be made dependent on a primary introversion. In a patient of the negative aggressive type, obsession with the past and its frustrations, its voids, its failures, paralyzes his enthusiasm for living. Generally, more introverted than the positive loving type, he has a tendency to keep turning over his past and present disappointments, building up within himself a more or less secret zone of bitter, disillusioned thoughts and resentment that often amounts to a sort of autism. But unlike the genuine autistic person, The abandonment neurotic is aware of this secret zone, which he cultivates and defends against any intrusion. More egocentric than the neurotic of the second, positive loving type, he views everything in terms of himself. He has little capacity for self-sacrifice, and his aggressiveness as well as constant need for revenge inhibits his impulses. His withdrawal does not allow him to have any positive experience that would compensate for the past. Consequently, the lack of the self-esteem and therefore of effective security is virtually total, resulting in an overwhelming feeling of helplessness toward life and people, as well as a complete rejection of any feeling of responsibility. Others have betrayed and thwarted him, and yet it is only from these others that he expects any improvement of his lot. A marvelous description that fits perfectly the character of Jean Venu, for he tells us, "All it took for me was to come of age and go and serve my adopted motherland in the country of my ancestors to make me wonder whether I hadn't been betrayed by everything around me, white folk refusing to accept me as one of their own and black folks virtually repudiating me, that it is precisely where I stand. An attitude of recrimination through the past, a lack of self-esteem, and the impossibility of making himself understood." Listen to Jean Venu. "Who can describe the description of those hothouse kids whose parents transplant them from France too early with the idea of making true Frenchmen out of them? One day to the next day, those who are so free and so alive are locked up in the lycée for their good, so say their tearful parents. I was one of those sporadic orphans, and as a result will suffer all my life. When I was 7, my childhood education was entrusted to a big gloomy lycée way out in the countryside. But the fun and games of adolescence never made me forget how painful mine was. My withdrawn, melancholic personality can be attributed to it as well as my fear of social contact, which today inhibits even my slightest impulse. Yet he would have liked to be cloaked with a mantle of affection. He never wanted to be abandoned. All the other students left during the vacation, and he was left alone. Remember the word alone in the big white lycée. Oh, those tears of a child who has no one to comfort him. He will never forget that he was apprenticed so young to solitude, a cloistered, withdrawn life, the life of a recluse, where I learned too early to meditate and reflect, a solitary life that in the end was profoundly moved by trifles. It has made me hypersensitive within myself, incapable of externalizing my joys and sorrows, so that I reject everything I love and turn my back despite myself on everything that attracts me." There are two processes at work here. I do not want to be loved. Why? Because one day, a very long time ago, I attempted to obtain a relation and I was abandoned. I have never forgiven my mother. Since I was abandoned, I shall make the other suffer. And abandoning the other will be the direct expression of my need for revenge. I am leaving for Africa. I do not want to be loved. I am running away from the object. Germaine Gold calls. Putting oneself to the test in order to prove it. I do not want to be loved. I am adopting a defensive position, and if the object insists, I shall declare I do not want to be loved. Lack of self-esteem? Yes, certainly. The lack of self-esteem is an object worthy of love, has serious consequences. For one thing, it keeps the individual in a state of profound inner insecurity, as a result of which it inhibits and distorts every relation with others. It is an object capable of arousing friendship or love that the individual is unsure of himself. The lack of effective self-esteem is to be found only in persons who in their early childhood suffer from a lack of love and understanding. Jean Vanu would like to be the same as any other man, but he knows his situation is false. He is a searcher. He is searching for serenity and permission in the eyes of the white man, for Jean Vanu is the other. The lack of effective self-esteem always leads the abandonment neurotic to an extremely painful and obsessional feeling of exclusion, to never fit in, and to feeling out of place. Effectively speaking, being the other is a term I have encountered on several occasions in the language of the abandonment neurotic. To be the other is to always feel in an uncomfortable position, to be on one's guards, to be prepared and to be rejected, and unconsciously do everything that's needed to bring about the anticipated catastrophe. One cannot overestimate the intense pain that accompanies such conditions of abandonment, a suffering that can be attributed to the initial experiences of exclusion in childhood, and makes the individual relive them particularly vividly. The abandonment neurotic demands proof. He is no longer content with isolated statements. He has lost confidence. Before forming an objective relationship, he reprimands repeated proof from his partner. His underlying attitude is not to love so as to be abandoned. He is extremely demanding. He believes he is entitled to every sort of reparation. He wants to be loved, totally, absolutely, and forever. My dearest Jean, your letter dated July arrived only today. It is perfectly unreasonable. Why do you torment me so? Do you realize how incredibly cruel you are? You make me happy mixed with anxiety. You are making me at the same time the happiest and the unhappiest of women. How many times must I tell you I love you? I am yours. I am waiting for you. Come. Finally, the abandonment neurotic has quit. He is called for. He is needed. And yet, what fantasies? Does she really love me? Does she really see me objectively? One day, a gentleman, a great friend of Papa Ned's, who had never seen Pont-à-Pont, arrived from Bordeaux. But good Lord, he was so dirty. Good Lord, he was so ugly. This great gentleman, friend of Papa Ned's, he had a horrible black face, all black proof that he can't even wash very often. Jean Vanu, anxious to find external reasons for his Cinderella complex, projects onto the 3 or 4-year-old kid an arsenal of racial stereotypes, and to Andre, he says, "Tell me, Andre, darling, despite my color, would you agree to marry me if I asked you?" He is terribly unsure of himself. He uses what Gigo calls Gigo has to say. The first characteristic seems to be the fear of showing oneself as one actually is. This is a broad range of various fears. Fears of disappointing, fears of displeasing, of boring, of wearying, and consequently of missing the opportunity to create a bond of friendship with others. If it already exists, damaging it. Abandonment neurotic doubts whether he can be loved as he is, for he has undergone the cruel experience of being abandoned when as a child. Hence, without artifice, he offered himself to the tenderness of others. Yet, Jean Vanu's life does have its compensations. He dabbles in poetry, he is very well read, and his study of Suarez is extremely intelligent. This too is analyzed by Gigo. Prisoner of himself, locked in his reserve, the negative aggressive exaggerates his feeling that everything he continues to lose or that his passiveness makes him lose is beyond repair. Consequently, apart from the privileged sectors, such as his intellectual life or his profession, he maintains profound feeling of worthlessness. What is the objective of such an analysis? Nothing short of proving to Jean Vanneau that in fact he is not like the others. Make people ashamed of their existence, Jean-Paul Sartre said. Yes, make them aware of their possibilities, that they have denied themselves, or the passiveness they have displayed in situations where it was really necessary to cling to the heart of the world like a splinter, to force, if needed, the rhythm of the world's heart, to dislocate, if needed, the system of controls, but in any case, certainly the face of the world. Jean Vanneau is the crusader of the inner life. When he sees Andre again, when he is face to face with the woman he has desired for so many months, he takes refuge in silence, the eloquent silence of those who know the artificiality of words and acts. Excuse me. Yet, Jean Vanneau is a neurotic, and his color is but an explanation of psychic structure. If this objective difference had not existed, he would have fabricated it from scratch. Jean Vanneau is one of those intellectuals who position themselves solely at the abstract level. He is incapable of making durable contacts with his fellow men. If people are benevolent, kind, and understanding toward him, it is because he overheard them talking about him. He knows them, and on his guard. My vigilance, if we can call it that, is a safety catch. I greet their proposals politely and naively. I accept other aperitifs, join in the games of organized on the deck, but I do not let myself be taken in the goodwill shown to me. Mistrustful as I am of this exaggerated sociability that has replaced a little too quickly the hostility in the midst of such of which they formerly tried to isolate me. He accepts, but also offers aperitifs. He doesn't want to be indebted to anyone, for if he didn't return the offer of his drinks, he would be a Negro and ungrateful like all the rest. If they are spiteful, it is precisely because he is a Negro. The fact is that they cannot help despising him. We have said, however, that Jean Vanneau, alias René Morin, is nothing more or less than a black abandonment neurotic. And he is put back in his place, his proper place. He is a neurotic who needs to be released from his infantile fantasies. It is our opinion that Jean Vanneau is not representative of the black-white experience. Rather, he accepts a certain way for a neurotic who happens to be black to behave. And the purpose of our study becomes clearer to enable the colored man to understand by way of clear-cut examples the psychological elements that can alienate his black counterparts. We deal with this further in the chapter devoted to phenomenological description. But we must recall that our aim is to enable healthy relations between blacks and whites. Jean Vanneau is ugly. He is black. What else does he need? Reread Go's observations, and it will be obvious to you. Un homme pareil au autre is an imposture. An attempt to have any contact between two races depend on the constitutional morbidity. There can be no argument that on both the psychoanalytical and the philosophical level, the Constitution is a myth for only those who seek to overstep it. If from the heuristic point of view, one must deny the existence of the Constitution, the fact still remains that certain individuals endeavor to enter into preconceived categories, and we can do nothing about it. Or rather, yes, we can do something about it. Earlier, we referred to Jacques Lacan. And this was no coincidence. In 1932, his thesis was violently critical of the notion of constitution. Apparently, we are somewhat removed from his conclusions, but our dissidence can be understood when we recall that we replaced the notion of constitution along the lines of the French school of thought with that of structure, embracing unconscious psychic life, such as we are able to know it in part, especially from the form of repression and inhibition, insofar as these elements play an active role in the actual organization of each psychic personality. We have seen the Jean Venu on examination reveal an abandonment neurotic structure of negative aggressive type. We can attempt to explain this reactively, i.e., by the interaction of individual and environment, and prescribe, for instance, a change of scenery, a change of air. In this present case, we found that the structure remains. The change of air that Jean Venu prescribed for himself was not aimed at positioning himself as a man. He had no intention of setting the world right. He was seeking not for this fulfillment characteristic of psychosocial equilibrium, but rather a corroboration of his externalizing neurosis. The neurotic structure of an individual is basically the elaboration, the formation, and the birth of conflicting knots in the ego, stemming on the one hand from the environment and on the other from the entirely personal way this individual reacts to these influences. Just as there was an attempt at mystification by inferring from Nini's and Mayote's capricious behavior that there was a general law governing the behavior of the black woman toward the white male, so we claim there would be a lack of objectivity in extending Venu's attitude to the man of color in general. And we would like to think we have discouraged any attempt to connect the failure of Jean Venu with the amount of melanin in his epidermis. The sexual myth, the obsession with white flesh conveyed by alienization, minds must no longer be an obstacle to understanding the question. In no way must my color be felt as a strain. From the moment the black man accepts the split imposed by the Europeans, there is no longer any respite. And from the moment on, it's understandable that he will try to elevate him to the white man's level, to elevate himself into the range of colors to which he has attributed a kind of hierarchy. We shall see another solution as possible. It implies restructuring the world. That's the end of chapter 3. We have moved on to chapter 4, the so-called dependency. Pardon me. Shout out to Sequoia Webb. Shout out to St. Louis, Missouri. Big up the fam out there. Strong city, St. Louis. Great food. Appreciate the check-in. We have just concluded chapter 3 of Frantz Fanon's great book, Black Skin, White Mask. We're going to break this up into separate parts, family. Moulier Bellator. Hopefully I'm not butchering the name as I'm butchering many of these French words here. Mojave Desert, shout out, big shout out to the family. Support these readings, make any suggestions if you'd like to see any books read here. We're going to break this up into parts here. I'm going to shut it down for now, and we'll be back with part 2. Support this reading with a Cash App. Anything, a cup of coffee would be appreciated. And shout out to the family there. Support TransAtlantic Productions and the great work that they're doing here with this great library from the master teachers. And I'm going to check in a little later with continued reading of the great work by Frantz Fanon, Black Skin, White Mass. Peace, family.